Way back in 2008, oh my God, I'm so old, when I first came to Portugal to do my Erasmus exchange here, I lived in a flat with 5 Portuguese girls and 1 Brazilian girl. This was the best possible scenario I could have been in, but it really didn't feel like that at the time. When I arrived, I was so quiet. I wasn't myself at all. I mean, you know me, I'm quite a fun, chatty person, but because I was so scared of making mistakes in the language, I most of the time kept my mouth shut. Whenever it was my turn to speak, my mind would just go blank. Can you relate? Eventually, I had to force myself to start speaking, and of course, I made a lot of mistakes. But that's when I realized that making mistakes was nowhere near as bad as I had imagined. The girls would just quickly correct me, and then I'd learned something new, which meant that I wouldn't make that mistake again. So these moments taught me way more than when I was sitting silently with a textbook. So now, after nearly a decade living in Portugal as an adult and 6 years of teaching it, here are the 5 things that I wish I had understood back then. They would have saved me from a lot of frustration, and they can save you a lot of time too. The first thing that I wish I had understood when I first moved into that student house: you shouldn't wait until you feel ready to start speaking. Speaking is how you become ready. This is exactly what I share with my students, and honestly, the progress they make from when they start their speaking practice after a few weeks is really impressive. I always tell them this is where the magic happens. This is where you get to take a real leap forward in your Portuguese. Just look at this win from my student Chris. She said, "This feels like the biggest win yet. After procrastinating the better part of 3 months, I bit the bullet and I recorded my 10-minute conversation with Tina, my friend and native language partner. I was rewatching a video this week and something Liz said gave me the gumption to do it. She said, 'You will never feel ready because ready isn't a feeling, it's a decision.'" And guess what? Chris's recording was absolutely brilliant. And she's now ready to take my intermediate course. So I need you to stop believing this now. You don't need to know more before you start speaking. Everybody wants to learn just a few more verbs, to just spend a little bit more time on apps, or to understand just a little bit more grammar. But as I said, that feeling of being ready never actually comes. There will always be another tense you haven't learned, another word you don't know, or another situation that you haven't prepared for. So instead of asking, "Do I know enough Portuguese to have a conversation?" ask, "Can I communicate one simple idea with the Portuguese that I already know?" Because you probably can. That's why as soon as students join my course, I set them the 30-day practical Portuguese challenge, which you can also get for free over here. I do this because I want them to start speaking from day 1, because it's a muscle that you have to start building up. Trust me, the first time that you get a compliment from a stranger on your accent, you are going to feel so good that you're going to want to use your Portuguese every day. The second thing I wish I had known is that pronunciation is way more important than grammar, especially in the beginning. So a lot of learners think that pronunciation is something that they can fix later. First they'll learn the words and then the grammar. Then once they're more advanced, they'll work on their accent and sounding more natural. But pronunciation isn't just about having a good accent. It's actually going to affect whether people understand you and whether you understand them. So if you're only learning words from seeing them written down, you might expect them to sound completely different from how a Portuguese person will actually say it out loud. So for example, if you saw this sentence written down, you might think it sounds like this: "Tudo bem? Estás boa?" But that's not how it's going to sound in Portuguese. First of all, we have a nasal sound in there. It's not bem, it's bem. And our S's in this word are actually going to be shush sounds. Estás. So you need to be listening to Portuguese, copying it, and practicing the movements that your mouth needs to make until you build up some muscle memory to actually produce those sounds yourself. This is also going to have the secondary effect of understanding other people when they speak as well. If you have a good grasp of the pronunciation rules, you can kind of reverse engineer the words and understand what's being said. Just take a look at this win from my student Dave. He had spent years learning Portuguese through a bunch of different apps, but after just a couple of weeks focusing properly on pronunciation, he told me he could already understand more than ever before. That's why whenever you learn a new word in Portuguese, don't only learn what it means, listen to how a native speaker says it and repeat it out loud. Your ears need to recognize the sound and your mouth needs to practice making it. You don't need perfect pronunciation before you start speaking, but the earlier you start working on the important sounds, the easier it becomes for people to understand you. And this can completely change the way that the Portuguese people actually respond to you. My students get compliments all the time, and trust me, it feels so good. If making the Portuguese sounds are something you are currently struggling with, I do have a free pronunciation guide to help you. It breaks down 7 sounds that English speakers usually find the hardest with simple examples and native audio, so you can hear exactly how each one should sound. The link is in the description, so make sure you download it. Now, the next thing I wish so many of my students understood, and it's probably an important one for you if you are planning on moving to Portugal, living in Portugal will not teach you Portuguese by itself. So lots of people who move here think, well, you know, when I get there, I'm just gonna pick it up. But simply living around Portuguese is not the same as actively learning it. I've met people who've lived in Portugal for several years, but still don't feel comfortable having a basic conversation. And it's easy to understand why. You try and say something, the other person notices that you're struggling and they switch to English because they want to help. So living in Portugal doesn't always give you lots of opportunities to practice. So to get around this, you need 2 things. The first is regular input that you can understand and actually enjoy. I have a whole lesson here on daily habits that helped me get fluent, but one of my favorite ones to give, especially for beginners, is changing your homepage on your computer to a Portuguese lifestyle website so that you can read an article every time you log on. So I love this website, nit.pt. It's a little bit like a magazine, and the articles are quite simple and about often fun things that are going on around Portugal. So every morning when I logged on to work, I would read a short article. It wasn't heavy news or something from a textbook because, let's be honest, that can be quite boring. It was something that I found fun, and that's why the habit worked so well. It didn't feel like studying. So whatever you're into, food, football, music, history, find a Portuguese account that talks about that subject, and you can either watch short videos or do some reading around the subject and fit it easily into your day. The second thing you need is regular output. So that means you need regular moments when you have to speak and produce the language yourself. So this could be a one-on-one conversation with a speaking partner every week, or ideally twice a week, or it could be simply ordering something when you go to a cafe. Just 15 minutes of focused, active listening and speaking can be much more useful than spending the entire day just passively listening to Portuguese. The next piece of advice that I have is, rather than learning fixed phrases, look out for patterns that are going to help you build your own sentences. So when you hear a useful sentence, don't just memorize that one. Look for the part that you can reuse. So if you have learned the simple phrase that you can find in my 30-day practical Portuguese challenge, queria café, se faz favor. I have got 2 ends of that sentence that can be reused endlessly. I just have to replace what it is that I want, because I've learnt I would like and please. So I could now replace that noun in the middle with anything. For example, queria uma consulta, se faz favor, if I am asking for a doctor's appointment. So now, whenever you hear a useful sentence, I want you to ask yourself, what part of this can I keep? What part of this can I change? And where else could I use it? So the more you start noticing patterns like this, the easier it becomes to stop translating every sentence from English and start building your own Portuguese sentences naturally. But knowing how to build a sentence is only half the job. You still need to practice saying it quickly enough so that it comes out when somebody is actually in front of you waiting for an answer. And this is my final piece of advice. Speaking only becomes natural through repetition. When you have the pressure of somebody staring at you waiting for an answer, it can be really common for your mind to go blank. Even if you recognize the words, you understand the grammar, you might even know exactly what they are asking you. But in a real conversation, you only have a few seconds to get the words out before somebody moves on or switches to English, which we don't want. So that only gets easier by doing speaking practice again and again and again and again. Now, I know this is the hardest part of your language learning journey, which is why I've made several videos about how to make speaking practice easier. And even though it's the part that nobody wants to do, it is absolutely the most important. So please don't keep putting it off. I have had so many students that haven't wanted to take this leap, but when they finally do, they feel so good about it and see a really rapid improvement in their Portuguese. So these wins that people in my community have aren't because the sentences they say are completely perfect. They happen because they practice sounds, they repeated useful things to say, and they actually use them with real people. And you can start small. Just find one person that you can practice with. It could be a tutor, a language partner, or somebody that you already see regularly at your local cafe or your gym, for example. You can choose one simple topic before you speak, like the weekend, your family, or your plans tomorrow. Another really great tip is to challenge yourself to use a grammar structure that you have been learning that week. So let's say you've been studying the future tense and you are getting into a conversation at the cafe. It's a great opportunity to practice what you've been learning. That's how you're going to make it stick. You could say something as simple as, este fim de semana vou visitar o Algarve. This weekend, I'm going to visit the Algarve. Now, your first conversations don't need to be long. Even 5-10 minutes is enough in the beginning. And again, the goal isn't to speak perfectly. It's simply to finish the conversation and notice what you need to improve for next time. You can pause, you can look up words, and you can definitely make mistakes. That's how speaking starts to feel fun and natural. Now, back when I was learning, we only had very boring traditional ways of learning a language. But since then, things have moved on a lot, and I myself have developed a lot of fun and effective strategies, especially if you are just getting started. So that's exactly why I created my free 60-minute workshop, Speak Portuguese Like a Pro. Inside, I show you how to improve your pronunciation, understand real-life Portuguese that the Portuguese actually use, and to learn the essential grammar that you need to get started building your own sentences. So instead of jumping between random lessons and apps, wondering what to focus on next, this is going to give you a really clear direction. The workshop is completely free and the link is in the description. So go save your spot and I'll see you on the inside.